All right, welcome back, YouTube. This is another Tim Cain video. This one is on mentoring. How many people have not had good mentors? Let's talk about that. I have had bad mentors. I have had no mentors. I find myself definitely working better and learning faster when I have a mentor to look up to, both with game design and in other facets of game development. So I think, there's like a quote or something where if you are the smartest person in the room, you should be in a different room, right? Or you're in the wrong room. And I think that that definitely applies to game development as well. If you have nobody to mentor you and to help you become better in your field, you're probably working at a place that doesn't have a lot of experienced people, or you are extremely experienced yourself. And I don't know, I think there's always something to learn, even from people who are quote unquote more junior than you, right? There can be fresh ways of looking at things. And I can give you plenty of experiences and stories where I know people or I've worked with people who have supposedly worked on big AAA masterpieces, and they are some of the least knowledgeable, high on their horse individuals that you can ever meet, and you should not learn from them. It is what it comes down to. So I don't know. I would just say that experience matters a lot, but also the way that somebody uses that experience and teaches that experience is just as important. Let's see what Tim has to say on it.
Hi, everyone. It's me, Tim.
Hi, Tim.
Today, I want to talk about
Tim.
mentoring.
Yeah.
Request for me to mentor someone is probably the most frequent topic of emails and DMs I get about this
I
channel.
can imagine.
And I turn them all down, and I will tell you why later.
It takes a
But
lot
I
of time.
totally understand the impulse.
It takes a lot of time to mentor, and as much as he might want to, I don't know. I find it, at least with myself, where I would love to take on the role of being a mentor for people, but at most I could probably only handle mentoring one person with the amount of time that I have. And I have more time than many. It's just, it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of thought and care into how you structure the education and the process for an individual person who might have a different way of learning than you, and from everybody else who might have different sets of knowledge, different skills. Teaching somebody who is really good with logic is easier for me, but teaching somebody who has a stronger like artistic brain is not so easy for me because I'm more logic oriented, like coding oriented, right? So it just it's very requiring.
To ask someone to give you advice, to warn you of some of the pitfalls coming up. And I get it. I've mentioned several times on this channel that I wished I had had a mentor, both professionally and personally, when I was younger.
Me too.
I really could have benefited from having someone who was older and wiser and more experienced to just tell me how some things work in life, in business, in game development. It all would have helped me a great deal. And
I think even
interesting,
beyond that, if you don't have, even if you have somebody who could be a mentor figure, that individual, especially in game dev, might have too many responsibilities that they have no time for mentoring. So I think that a lot of game dev is learning through osmosis and learning through failure. You just have to jump in and do something yourself and observe how other things are done. Make the most of the time that you have. So for me, when I was working at a place, it was great because I could go to lunch with the lead programmer and lead artist, both of whom were extremely knowledgeable in their fields and were very good at talking about it and teaching. So I used the time of lunch to ask questions and to learn things that I didn't know about. But you don't always have those times and those availabilities. It just kind of is the way that it is, and you have to, especially if you're in game dev and you don't have any sort of mentor figure, or you don't have a company that you're working for, you have to go out of your way to seek knowledge and to learn it and to absorb it. And I think that Tim Cain is his channel is fantastic for that. And I think that if you're like watching our streams, we always share our information if we have it. We don't hide anything. We don't put anything behind a paywall. So for whatever we're worth, we also are, a source of some information, especially with like game design and early stages of pre-production. That's my forte. But when it comes to like the art side of things, you might be better watching some like artist on stream who's working on a game or something like that. I think a Kumezu who's in here, she comes in here often. She is an environment artist, if I'm not mistaken, and she streams on Twitch. I'm gonna give her a shout out. How do I do this? Shout out. I think I'm gonna be. I think this is the name. Yes. Yeah. Go give her a follow or a subscription, because I think she streams her environment art. So she's a great person to watch for art related things.
I think I was open to it. I look back at my early projects and how they would have been better, and I totally would have been open for someone to give me that advice. But
That's a good point too. You have to be open to receiving that, and that requires you to stomp on your ego enough to be willing to admit that you're bad and that you need help. It's not always the easiest thing to do, but it is a requirement if you want to learn things. Otherwise, you will be stuck learning at the pace that you set for yourself, and honestly, you won't be a very good team player. So don't do that.
my first project, when I worked at Pegasus Software when I was 16 years old, later turned into Cybron. I was 16, and everyone else who worked there were a few people in their 20s, most people were in their 30s, and I think there was even one or two people in their 40s. None of them had made a game before either. So we were all kind of in the same boat, and it was 1981.
Yep.
It wasn't like there was a lot of experienced people in the industry. The industry had been around since...
Hater Cyber, thank you for the follow.
Yes, there had been video games earlier than this, but the industry had been around less than 10 years.
Yeah, I've been in a couple of teams like that where you're working with people who are very inexperienced and haven't had a released game before, so it changes the team dynamics very heavily. Especially as a designer, I know that I had to structure my design documents a little bit differently because a lot of individuals who would read it have never been through the process of producing a game before. And as a team, even if you're working with people who have made games before, you might be working with a team that has never worked together before, and therefore your methods of communicating and transferring data and knowledge is very different from how it could have been at different companies. It's really tough. And if you don't have enough time to be a mentor or to set up those standards, you can kind of just be working in this chaotic environment where everybody, even if they have individual knowledge, doesn't have the time or the right channels to share it with each other, and therefore the entire team is kind of stagnating. I've been there, and it sucks. It really sucks. If you want a team to become well-oiled and to gain knowledge at a even pace, you need to have a standard communication protocol where I think that strike teams help a lot here, where you pair up less knowledgeable people with more knowledgeable individuals and have them work on a feature together so that you have that sharing through osmosis and that kind of secondary sharing of information of, oh yeah, don't worry, when we were working in this feature on this strike team, we handled it this way. Now you've taught another person or multiple people how to do things that you learned in a previous strike team. That said, if you have strike teams and you have a good method of sharing information and knowledge, you probably should have a retrospective or especially like a milestone retrospective where you say, okay, strike team A working on this feature, share with us what you've made and what you've learned from it, and there you have that dedicated platform and stage to share that knowledge with the rest of the team, right? And ideally you make some documentation for that.
Our first game, the game I got hired to make tools for, was games played on a cable set-top box, something I would never do ever again after that.
Fair enough, yeah.
But that I had no experience with, and they were still figuring out. And there were some very restrictive rules on how to make art and how to do the code and what kind of inputs you could get from the controller and what kind of lag there was on the controller.
Can imagine.
Later, we moved to making a PC game, and I had already been to college by then. I started in high school, and then I went off to college, and I kept working at this place. It paid for college. I ended up teaching the lead programmer on that first PC game fundamental ways of programming in C. how to use linked lists, how recursion works. And I still remember on recursion, I explained what it was, then I explained why it was useful. Then when I saw he was getting too excited about using it, I had to explain why you didn't want to use it in some circumstances that looked really good for recursion.
I had the same thing with pointers when I learned about pointers for the first time in C++. Hey, Hater, how old are you? If you don't mind me to ask, I am 30 years old. I just turned 30 a couple months ago. I have a baby face. I'm getting old. I have back problems. I grunt when I stand up. You know how it is. Maybe you don't. Maybe you're younger. But yeah, I had the same problem when I was learning about pointers. And I was like, oh my God, pointers sound amazing because then I don't have to, I can just edit the variable directly. And it's like, well, hold on. Using pointers is not always the greatest thing, especially if you have, sometimes making a copy and editing that copy is exactly what you want to do, right? If you're, modifying the player's gold, for instance, you don't want to edit directly the player's gold until you've done the calculations for how much gold the player has gained or lost, right? So that's where you make the copy, you have the function, and then you can edit by reference to that gold value. But even then, you may want to have a separate copy because the saved copy on disk is what the player save data is, but you may want to have different information in runtime. So, there's plenty of situations like that, I think. Still young. Your age is 25. I kind of know what you mean, dude. We're in the same boat. We're becoming old.
That was better to use a loop in terms of just memory and the unseen overhead of calling methods where you were pushing parameter after parameter after parameter on the stack. I had to explain to him what the stack was. So there was a lot of stuff going on there where you would have thought I would have been the one in need of a mentor, but I was often explaining things to people.
Well, it can be both. I mean, if for instance, if I'm working in a team with junior designers, of course I'm the mentor in that case, right? But that doesn't mean that I am completely perfectly knowledgeable about everything with game design. I only have 10 years in the industry. I could go to a company where there's some 60-year-old game designer who's worked on 3 times the titles that I have, or potentially even more, who I will be looking up to for that wealth of knowledge. So, I think that you are always the apprentice and you're always the mentor in some case, right? You're always the master. But that, especially with game development, because of how quickly it changes and because there are no set ways of doing things, I don't think this is never a field of work where you can become that master and that title will be held for more than a couple years. Because by that time, new technology has come out, new games have come out. The industry, the market has changed, that they have different expectations. Making a game one way was working 2-3 years ago. Now players expect something more. And that will always be the case because, it's just kind of that sort of industry. And I think that's part of what makes it fun, is that you can never become perfect because you will always have new things to try and attain and to learn. That's why I like it anyway.
It was a new industry, and I dove into it when I was like 12 or 13 in terms of learning all this stuff. And so by the time I was 16, I was doing it. So fast forward to Interplay, where I started in my mid-20s, but by the time I had my own project, which was Fallout, and Fallout shipped, I was already, when Fallout shipped, I had just turned 32.
It's crazy, by the way. That's crazy. He was 32 when Fallout shipped. That's wild. Ugh. Now I just have that sort of imposter syndrome, where I'm like, damn, dude, I'm gonna be turning 31 this year, and the greatest thing I think the best game that I helped make was Darkest Dungeon, but my role in that was very minor. It was very, I wouldn't say minor. I did do a lot of work on it, but it was not core to the high level of the game, right? It was like balancing content creation. I made, a couple of the maps, worked on some of the AI stuff, but it was never anything to the level of actually directing my own game. So Colden Chronicles would be the game that if we get funded, I would be creatively directing on my own. So it would be about the same age as Tim if that was the case. Worked for 2 years with the IT company as a mobile developer, but the thing is, I learned nothing from that time I worked with them. What do you mean? Like maybe just it was all things that you've done before? In which case, maybe you didn't learn a lot that was new, but it was a lot of experience, right? It was a lot of reinforcement of things that you already knew, and that is a good thing, right? Because that is skill, right? Knowing how to do something is not skill. Knowing how to do something without having to rely on external knowledge, I think, is skill.
By then, I'd been in the industry more than a decade and a half. And by the time I was in my mid 30s at Troika, I'd already been in the industry for 2 decades.
That's crazy.
I looked young. I looked young and innocent and wide eyed, but I had double, quadruple, sometimes 10 times the experience of some of my peers. There I was with 20 years of experience working with someone who had entered the industry the year or two before. Sometimes those people were at publishers. And it was a strange situation because they knew things I didn't and I knew they did. But it was an odd thing to have someone who's in their 40s who just started the industry the year before tell you the way things are and you've been in the industry for 20 years. But guess what? I still wanted a mentor.
Yes.
Even with all that, I wanted a mentor so badly because I realized what I didn't know and I was coming to realize what I wasn't good at. And I didn't have anyone to tell me, hey, it's okay to let go of those things you weren't good at. So I still banged my head against a bunch of things trying to get better.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of just struggle in the darkness when you don't have that mentor figure, right? Where, yeah, you can learn things, but it would be a lot faster if you worked with somebody who already knew those. So I think for me, I've learned a lot of ways not to do things, and I've tried to self-teach how to do things properly, but I still need experience doing things properly. Yeah, it's a struggle, but I think it's a good sign when you know that, okay, I know that I don't know how to do A, B, and C, and you try to seek out people that know that. Thankfully, game development is becoming a lot less opaque than it used to be, a lot less secretive, and finding knowledge as a new developer is a lot easier than it used to be, especially 10 years ago, especially back in the 80s and 90s. And yeah, having the experience is, I think, where you create that skill, right? So I know how I would properly create and produce a game. That doesn't mean that I've ever done it, right? Because I didn't have anything to do with the production of Darkest Dungeon. On the train game, I don't think it's going to be bursting with anybody's. I don't think it's going to be bursting anybody's bubbles if I say that that game was produced horribly. And Forever Skies, I was only partially, on that team. I didn't have anything to do with production there either. So Colden Chronicles, our game, would be the first game that I've, tried to create a proper pipeline of production based on my past experiences and failures. Things that I saw work in Darkest Dungeon or Forever Skies, and things that I know didn't work in the train game that we worked on. And I think that, from what I have spoken to with many producers, because when I was trying to think of, okay, how can I find the right production method, I would go to places like Gamescom or GDC and I would talk to producers that were way more knowledgeable than me about, okay, here's my plan. Why do you think this would or wouldn't work? Okay, so that's a problem. That costs a lot of money, but it's the ideal way to do it. So if we want to do it, we need to evaluate this pipeline, and make sure that we start it from pre-production stages. Okay. And with that, I was able to produce the method that we're going to be using with Golden Chronicles, with the, deleting of the prototype. Well, let me rephrase that. Creating a new project for the vertical slice as opposed to building on the shoddy foundation of the prototype, and having a zero bug policy, which is a bit different than what it sounds. So it's just, you need to seek out people who are more knowledgeable. And if you don't do that, if you can't take the initiative to do that, you will stagnate and you will be the forever junior or the forever regular. You probably won't ever reach senior, even if you have the years to justify becoming senior. Becoming senior is a key, mentoring people who are below you is a key aspect of being a senior in most cases. So that all just takes a lot of perseverance and intuition, introspection, and for certain a managing of your ego and the initiative to reach out and to become more knowledgeable by absorbing the knowledge of people who are more experienced than you. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Me just working the front end part, never in my life touch anything else. I've heard, yeah, I've software development to me is so much different than, I don't know, I kind of view it because I don't know if there's like a front end aspect of game development as there is with software developing. But I could be wrong. I'm not a programmer. So, things to me like when he mentions like the stack and other like recursive, like these topics like recursive development, I don't really know what that means. And I would love to sit down with some programmers and have them hammer that into my brain. Okay, so sorry, I have to pause again, but that's kind of core to it, right? So when you become a game designer, for instance, you don't really need to know how to make all of the art. You don't need to know how to make all of the code, but you should know enough and especially know the lingo so that when you talk to artists, when you talk to programmers, you know how to phrase what you want done in the language that they are going to be speaking in their documentation and to other programmers. That will help you a lot when it comes to becoming a good designer. And that's usually one of the things that helps to separate junior designers from senior designers, is knowing that lingo, knowing some of the pipelines, and being able to at least speak on a level that you can say, okay, yeah, I need this to be an array of this structure so that when I can, balance that in my spreadsheet, I can import this directly into the engine and we can have that working the way that it's supposed to work. Or, I need this to be on a different tick, maybe so that we can asynchronously handle this for optimization purposes. And I don't need this to be checked. We were talking about that like yesterday. I don't need the inventory to be sorted. I mean, I don't know. What am I yapping about? Maybe you don't need to know that as a designer, but it does help because you might have done a bit of a prototype separately, and the more knowledge that you can pass to the programmer so that they can implement it properly, the more time and effort you save them. So realistically, as a designer, the more knowledge that you obtain, the better. And I think that goes for most cases in game development.
Just so you know, it wasn't stuff like code and design. Some of it was. I knew there was code I could be better at, and there was design I could be better at. But there was a lot of things like, how do you manage a group of people? How do you make a good contract? What do you look out for?
Leadership and business.
How do you network with other people in the industry? These were...
Oh yes. I mean, okay. Here's a scary story. I've worked at a couple of good places and I worked at some bad places. There are times where individuals will refuse to teach you knowledge because they will think that by doing so you might threaten their position. These people are toxic. You should not work with these people, and you should call out their bullshit immediately. The problem is it's difficult sometimes to know when that's occurring. But I worked at one place where I could have obtained more biz dev knowledge. How to negotiate with publishers, how to talk to them, how to pitch to them. And I was refused access to this for some fear, I think, in the way that I speak. I'm very blunt. Honestly, though, I felt like most of the publishers I talked to prefer this way of speaking because they know that I'm not bullshitting them. Regardless, I think that I was viewed as not very diplomatic, and you do need some diplomacy when you talk to publishers. Understandable. But now by refusing that knowledge, I've never obtained it. And you often aren't going to be taught how to pitch a game to a publisher without having done it. And I promise you that as good as you think you are on paper or in theory or in the mirror, a publisher talk can go off on tangents. And you need to know about the publisher that you're speaking to as well. I mean, you could be talking to a publisher that publishes games that are very different from what you're making. In which case, why are you pitching to that publisher? Or you may be pitching during a time when a certain genre, maybe your genre, is popular. And you should mention this. So there are a lot of factors to a successful pitch that you do need to consider when you're pitching and in that moment. And like I said, it can go anywhere. You don't just want to sit there and read off of a script for 30 minutes. Okay, my game is an action RPG set in a fantasy world. Immerse yourself in the reality that you are a piece of shit player and blah 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 blah. And so you don't want to be reading off this because there's no authenticity to that, and there's no presentation of that. You do need to capture the attention and the interest of the publisher. They need to be your white knight. As I think there was some talk about publishers that I mentioned, and I think that was a really good way to put it, is that you need the publisher. You just need one publisher to be your white knight, to love your game and to stand for it so much that even against pushback from other producers over at the publishing company, they will say, no, I know this is good. We need to pitch it. We need to publish this. We need to give them money. That's who you need to get. So you need to get that one person at a company who can stand for you and believe in your project wholeheartedly. So when you're speaking, oftentimes reading off a script or preparing some answers to questions is not really the way to do it. Being authentic, minimizing those risks, saying it's okay. If you give us money, you can trust that we are going to develop this game. That's really what it's about. And sometimes that isn't done via a good picture or a good set of words on a slide. It's by the way that you speak and the promises you make. All of that is stuff that is really hard to teach outside of the moment, and it's hard to be on pitches sometimes because they're often done. You need to know a little bit about biz dev. You need to just kind of figure some things out about production and about budgets and all these things that are very different to developing the game at a developer level, right? Knowing how to make good code, knowing how to make a good design document is miles different from knowing how to make a milestone, what am I thinking? A milestone schedule, sorry, and knowing how to make a good pitch deck and knowing how to get all of knowing how much each aspect of development costs, localization and just outsourcing, porting, all these different things. That's a whole different aspect of development that you do need a mentor, I think, in most cases to learn. And very few people are willing to teach you that. Very few. So what I did, which was kind of the dumb way, but I just kind of just did it. I just made what I thought was a good pitch deck, a decent budget, and I just tried pitching. And it wasn't very good. It wasn't successful, of course, because otherwise I would not be here without a job and a salary. But I got better, and I pitched again last year, and we did much better than the first time. And this year I will pitch again, and I will structure things better according to what I've learned from the past 2 years. You just need to kind of jump in to do it, and you need to take the initiative. And a lot of game developers aren't willing to do that, and that's usually where you filter out the people who are in it as a, because they think they want to do it and they think that they'll be good at it, but they never really get past that certain level. It's a very high learning curve to become a good developer, and well, we're stuck on that path too.
These were things I didn't know how to do.
Hey, Twitch.
No one ever told me how to do it, and in fact, some of this stuff was actively discouraged at some of the places I worked at. They didn't want me to know that stuff.
Yes.
Because they, especially the networking with other industry folks, they saw as, well, people will just leave. And
yeah. If the better you get at networking, the more likely it is that you'll leave the company, which is like, it's not only a really, really, really retarded thing to think, but by actively preventing your employees from getting better, you will encourage them to leave because they will feel as if they aren't getting better. It's complete brainless thought. If you want to be the company that you would like your employees to stay at year after year, decade after decade, you need to encourage them to become better and better. They will feel better about themselves, your games will become better, and therefore you will make more money. But, a lot of people, I think, don't see it that way. They do fear that their jobs will be at stake, or they will just go to a different company if they learn more. It's a horrible way of thinking. I think you've already doomed your company if that's the way that you treat your employees.
And I realized later, it's like, yeah, if your company doesn't compare well to other companies, I can see why you wouldn't want people to talk to other companies and find out that it's better over there. They're paying them better. The insurance is better. They don't crunch them as much. I can see why you wouldn't want them talking to them. But that's not the kind of mentoring I was
agree
looking
to
for.
sure.
I just wanted to know,
I've
like,
had that problem.
what techniques do you guys use? What do you use for source control? How do you make builds at night? Do you have a dedicated machine? Is it just on the lead programmer's machine? Just stuff like that no one had ever told me, that we had to stumble into our own techniques. That now you start on a project and there's probably somebody telling you, here's how we do all that. So you don't even have to think about it. Somebody's.
Yep. Yep. I mean, it was the same way when I was jumping into dev, and I've had that. I think every company will have something where they don't do it as efficiently as another. But what separates a company that you want to work for and one that you don't want to work for, the one that you want to work for are the companies that say, okay, we've clearly been doing it wrong, and we just hired you from this new company. Tell us how you did things, and maybe we can improve our own pipeline. Companies that have retrospectives where things actually change, where people are, their ideas are considered equal, and they're listened to, and one that enables you to become a better and better developer day after day. That's the place where you want to work. And people who don't hoard knowledge, but rather share it so that everybody can become better. And as an employer, you want to make sure that you do foster the environment and culture where you consider your employees as investments. And investments should grow. And if your investments are stagnating or not growing, you've made bad investments. So realistically, having a good culture, good employees, making sure that you hire people that aren't those kinds of toxic individuals, and you have a pipeline that enables that sharing of knowledge. So, every other Friday you have a, optional presentation that anybody can sign up for and share knowledge. You have strike teams, you have frequent retrospectives, you have postmortems, you have learning days, you have, paid for or partly paid for trips to industry events where people can network and gain knowledge that way, or talks. All important, and you should do that. And then what Tim brings up too, having a studio that treats its employees better, that doesn't crunch, that has good insurance policies, that gives people the leeway to try new games and things like that, or even having like a game night. All of these things can help people feel more at home, and more like if they stay with this company, they will be able to grow and become better individuals. And that's what I think separates a destination company from a stepping stone company, if we want to use those terms, right? Ideally, your company is a destination company, not a stepping stone company. The difficulty is that most companies are stepping stone companies because companies are competing with each other to become the destination companies. But there's enough game dev studios out there that I think that there's no real worry that you won't have individuals who will apply for you. Of course, there are far fewer game dev jobs than there are game developers. That's kind of what makes it so hard to get into game development and stay stable within game development. But as an employer, you always have the pick to choose from, and you need to make sure that you foster the environment at your company that people want to stay at. And unfortunately, I've worked at places that didn't do that. By withholding knowledge, or as TwitchDog put it, you have peers that hold on to knowledge because they feel that their value and their status will be threatened if other people know how to do what they do. And realistically, at a good company, what it means is that you can go on vacation and know that you have somebody who can step in and take a bit of your responsibilities if they're needed, and they won't have to call you while you're on vacation. That's how it should be. Share knowledge.
Telling you how it's done, or there are books you can buy, YouTube videos to watch of someone telling you how it's done. The flip side of this, which I just want to touch briefly, I've worked with many people who do not want advice for different reasons.
Yeah.
They think they know better on everything, or they have discovered a way that they think is better, or they're pretty sure they can avoid pitfalls that people have told them about. And guess what? Sometimes they did. Sometimes their better way was better, but sometimes it wasn't. And it's really hard to tell at the beginning of someone who wants to do this, whether it be good or bad. What frustrates me is when they do their thing and it turns out to be something bad, and then they blame me. They're like, well, you were my manager, you should have warned me against this. And I'm like,
oh man, okay, yeah. Look, I think that's employer beware, right? Where I agree, right? Like my method of learning in game dev is often to let me do it myself, let me struggle, and if I get stuck, I will ask questions, right? And if I end up doing something in a worse way, tell me so that I can do things better. But I just learn better by jumping into and trying something myself. I'm not really good at watching like a YouTube video. I don't feel like I learned anything by doing it that way, or like reading a book. Again, I just don't learn very fast this way or very efficiently. So I'm much better at just jumping into something, getting stuck, and then getting help to get over that wall. Um, but if you have people that are that sort of personality where they just refuse to listen to something that is clearly better, they are not going to be a very good employee. They're going to only do the things that they believe is best in that moment. They're not going to get better at the same rate as the rest of your team. You are better off finding somebody with less experience and a better method of learning, and is more capable of absorbing knowledge, better at listening, better at learning with the rest of the team, than you will be with this person who might be more knowledgeable or experienced, but doesn't grow at the same level as the rest of the company. It's all part of culture, and it all comes down to company culture. It's not worth hiring somebody who is actively going against your team just because in that moment they might be the best or the most wise, right? I know some people disagree with me on that though.
I tried, and you told me you guaranteed that you still should have told me not to do this. And I'm like, okay, you're not somebody I want to mentor because you're just not open to it.
Yeah.
I think of my own projects though. There have been a lot of wasted time and money as I experimented on how to do things. But on one of my own projects, there was someone who told me, I have a better way than you. And I'm like, I don't think you do. I've done this a lot, professionally and academically. I don't think you have a better way. But he convinced me he did and that he would.
Okay.
3 months later, no, wasn't better. Time was lost. And because time was lost and money was lost, there were features that didn't go into that game at all. And some features that went in a really bad state and shipped in a really bad state. All because someone argued with me that their way was better than my way and they knew better than me, despite all evidence to the contrary. And I can't help but think that is a person who wouldn't benefit from mentoring. Because if someone tells me, look, I've got a lot of experience with this, let me show you some things, let me show you some white papers from academia, don't do this. I can't imagine going, nah, I'm going to do it anyway. But
Yeah, that's a tough situation. That happens a lot in game dev. I imagine it, I mean, I imagine it happens a lot in other industries too, but game dev is the one that we're talking about. It happens a lot because everybody wants to think that their way of doing something is better, right? Because that validates them. And in a lot of cases, there are many ways of solving a problem. And what way is best is, let's put it this way. What's the word I'm trying to say here? Solution A in some game might be more efficient than solution B, but a different game might have those reversed. And solution B is now the most efficient. So you do run into a situation a lot, especially with the implementation of features or the design of features. Eventually somebody, and this is unavoidable, I think if you work in a team, will say, I think this way is better. And they could be right. The problem is that you don't often have the time, and in the case that Tim brings up, money, to experiment to a significant amount. Because now when you're trying two different methods to solve the same problem, you're wasting two people's time. So it's taking, technically in terms of man hours, it's taking twice as long as it should be in order to determine what the best way moving forward is. That's usually why you prototype, right? You spend a bit more time in pre-production where it's a bit chaotic to determine the ways of moving forward that you think are going to work. And in some cases, you might be so far into development that you need to say, okay, great, your idea is better. Let's save it for the sequel, right? Let's do it properly the second time because we do not have the time or the money to do it in this game. That's just how it's going to be. You could spend 10, 20, 30 years perfecting your game, or you could just get your game released. You could just put it out there. So sometimes it's better just to bite the bullet, go with the solution that you could have done better the first time, and resolve it the second time, or learn from it, learn from your mistakes. The Tim specific situation is one that I've had before. I think every game developer has had before if you worked in a team. I think what you need in that case is a good creative director, a good producer to step in and say, no, this is what this person has. We're making the decision here. You either like it, don't like it, doesn't matter. We have to do it this way because that's what the person in charge of the system is saying that we need to do. And you know what? Sometimes it might not be good. Sometimes the other person might have been right. That's just kind of one of the risks that you take when you make a decision like that. It is what it is.
I've run into people like that. And so mentoring isn't for everyone.
No, it's not. There are different ways of mentoring too.
One thing I've been told by a lot of people when I talk about this in the industry is, hey, some people just have to go through a phase of, I know better, and then they will learn from failure, and then they will become better. And I said, I see that, but two things I always respond with. One,
okay,
learning from your own failure costs time and therefore money,
yes.
And it's often not your time, and it's often not your money.
True.
If you're an indie solo developer, knock yourself out. Learn from failure. I think it's one of the best ways you can learn. But if you're learning from failure on someone else's dime, there's an issue there, especially if they're warning you not to do this and you resist, and then you still waste time and money.
He's exactly right. 100% right. And I am somebody who learns better from failure, from my own failure, from attempting things. But I know that right now in Colden Chronicles, I have this luxury. It's a great luxury. I love learning this way. I love jumping into something in Unreal and knowing, I don't know how to do this. Let me try it, see if it works. And if I need to refactor it, what's the cost? There isn't any. So, well, there is a cost because I'm not making money, but it's a lot less of a cost than if I were being paid by a studio, right? So I get it. I think that he's right though, where whoever mentioned it to him, people do need to sometimes go through a phase where they think they're right and they need to crumble. I've been through that phase. It's the ego phase, and I think that you often have. We've talked about that before, right? Where you have that like imposter syndrome. You have vulnerabilities. You build up your own ego because you're afraid of being wrong and failing. I think everybody goes through that at some point. I know people that are older than me that have that problem. I know, everybody's going to have some sort of ego at some level. I think though that you get filtered out. You either crumble and you realize that your ego was the problem and you deal with the ego, or you stick to your ego and you believe that you're correct and you either become an indie developer or you get out of game dev as a whole, because it's really not a place that treats people with big egos well, unless you can make it to the point where you're like a creative director of some studio, Todd Howard, and you can have a giant ego because you have that financial backing. But in most cases, that isn't going to be you, right? You're not going to be the next Hideo Kojima. On the team and say don't do that, dumbass, and you do, you're out. Yeah, I mean, it just is what it is. Like, I agree with Tim, though. I think that there is a big difference between learning and failing on your own dime, which is mostly what I've done. There's tons of like little side projects that I've tried to make myself in order to learn, and I know that I can do it at my own pace. But the moment we get funded in Colden Chronicles, we cannot afford that same level of failure and chaos, right? Because we will never make a game. We need to then be like, okay, time to take things seriously. Producer, experienced. Art director, experienced. Design director, probably me, experienced, right? People in charge of these things that know generally what they're doing, and even if they make mistakes, they can still make a decision, right? Because making a decision is better in many cases than trying to do things correctly and failing to do them in a reasonable amount of time. Just make the decision. This is done this way. I get that you have complaints. If we have time, here's the scheduled time for buffer period where we might be able to push into. That depends on the producer. I'm not the only one in charge of the game's development. Okay? And if we don't have the time, we don't have the time. Simple as that. So save it for the sequel. Hey, Kimezu. How you doing? I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Also, I think it's very, very commonly overlooked that you can learn from failure, but it doesn't have to be your failure. You can learn from
Yes.
other people's
Learn by
failures.
osmosis.
You can read postmortems. They used to have a lot of these in Game Developer magazine, where people would write a postmortem of the project they just finished, and you had to read between the lines because a lot of them said things, the same things, like we designed more than we should have, and we overscoped, and we, we misestimated. It's like, yeah, that's like the rubber stamp postmortem. Everybody does that, but you have to.
Oh, we wish we could put more in the game, but we didn't put as much in the game. Okay, well, thanks for telling me everything that every single game in development that has released has probably done. I'll read your obituary. Maybe we should call it that. Yeah, game instead of game postmortem. Game postmortem is if it succeeds. Game obituary is if the game didn't succeed. But I think that you can learn a lot from, either case. And I think that for me, at least in my phase of game development career, watching postmortems is incredibly great because I can see exactly where they might have made mistakes in pre-production, and that kind of helps me to shape my own views of that stuff too. But also, a good postmortem, I think, is very unapologetic. It's very honest, saying, yeah, we made a mistake. We screwed up. This was a stupid decision, and it cost us this amount of time. But I have also seen postmortems where it's kind of just patting each other on the back for game well done. And it's like, well, yeah, your game isn't that great. It clearly it was buggy on release, which means you messed up some sort of phase of production. Making a game is a stupid decision. Okay. Yeah. It's definitely not the greatest software that you can make if you want to make software. There's a lot safer options.
Look for more things, like there was someone on the team who was hyper negative about everything and we didn't get rid of him early enough, or our manager sent us down some blind alleys because his ego got in front of his game direction. These are all things you have to watch out for. And also, I want to recommend... But
that's the problem is during a postmortem, you might not hear that, even if that is true, because that manager is still working there, and they don't want to call that person out. Now, to be fair, I would call that out. But at the same time, if I knew that my CEO had kept on a manager who had such a problem with ego that it ruined the entire game, I would 100% mention that in the postmortem, and then file my resignation letter right at the end of that postmortem. Welcome to the whole AAA game industry. Yeah, it's like, I'm not going to apologize. I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it for the entire team to hear. And then I'm out of here. Fuck it. If you're that bad of a CEO that you can't get rid of somebody who's causing the problems, you're not a very good CEO. Have fun licking the boots of the publisher for the next 10 years, never having enough money to do anything on your own.
And this, don't look at mentors in the light of they're saying, look, I'm right, just shut up and do it. Look at them as, look, I've failed. I've done things in the area you're doing them in. I have failed. Learn from my failures. If I tell you you're driving on a road and there's a pothole ahead, don't just speed up and think, I'm a good driver. Maybe you want to switch lanes. There's a pothole in the lane you're in.
I think sometimes, though, I don't think I'm a very good teacher or mentor, but I think that sometimes a good mentor does let the individual make failures. But again, what happens on the dime of the company is different than what happens when you know that it's okay for that failure to be made, right? So you might give a junior a task to make a document, right? Like a design document, knowing full well that they will probably not make as good of a design document as you will. But that's part of the learning experience, right? Is you're giving them that challenge. They will meet the challenge as best as they can, and then you help them learn to get through that last bit. That's the point of having a junior, is you know that they're not as knowledgeable or experienced or efficient as your seniors. But that's the point of it, is for them to take the big challenge, make the mistakes, and then you teach them the rest of the way. You'll be blackballed after the. I don't care if the industry blacklists me, go for it. Fine, great. Oh my god, I can't work at EA anymore. Oh no, whatever will I do? Not working in Dragon Age Veilguard. Let them make a small fare, like ordering wings instead of a hamburger or something like that. Yeah, that's the problem with having juniors in the industry, is that we need juniors in the industry. We need more juniors, and we need junior positions open. But because game dev is so financially competitive, it is just not financially viable in most cases, especially smaller studios where you might have really knowledgeable people, right? Because we've talked about before how the moment AAA studios get 10, 20-year experienced devs, a lot of them leave to start their own indie companies. But because they're working on some shoestring budget, they don't have the time or the money to mentor juniors, even though they are the best equipped from a knowledge standpoint to mentor juniors. So the game industry is really, really messed up. And, I hope that it can undergo some sort of transformation where we do give indie developers a bit of a bigger budget and a bit more leeway so that they can be the ones to bring juniors into the industry. So it's really hard if you're a junior that's you kind of feel like your only option is to go towards the AAA studios, which oftentimes give you. I think the AAA studios will oftentimes be some of the worst experiences, even if they're pretty good at teaching and you have a lot of people to network with, and that therefore you have more connections with which to use to branch out into the industry. I think that a lot of people would be more successful long term if they had joined a indie or double A team for the first moments of their career as opposed to joining the AAA studio. I don't know if that makes sense.
So this brings me to the last thing I want to say, which is people have asked me to be mentors.
Yeah.
I've gotten a lot of those requests.
I can imagine.
These requests have ranged from, will you please read my design doc, to will you play my game? Will you read my book? And in one case, will you read my movie script? And I've turned all of these down, by the way.
Interesting.
Would you be my father? Here's my mentoring. This is a way for me to get the message of how I think game development should go, what kind of mind state you should be in, what your POV should be, or if you don't want a POV like mine, because I talk about a lot of games from my POV, understand my POV and develop your own. But don't just wander around with a vanilla POV, because then you end up with vanilla games.
Yep.
Very bland games. Figure out what kind of toppings you like on your game. And do you like fudge or caramel sauce? You got to figure that out on your own. Sorry, everything's a food reference with me. I'm very, very hungry right now.
I get it.
And the best part about this being my mentoring is you don't have to listen to it. I've seen people, I saw on a forum somewhere go, this guy talks a lot. And somebody went, why are you listening?
Yeah, why are you watching the
video? Does he come into your house and punch you and make you watch YouTube? But what I love is some of you are following this a lot, even if you don't agree with everything I say, which is absolutely fine and healthy. But some of the things I say make you go, I didn't think of that. Mm-hmm. And that's awesome. And I know some of you will follow what I'm saying, and that's awesome too. So this is my mentoring. I think it is helping people, and it's helping a lot more people than I could help one-on-one mentoring.
Yes, 100%.
Even more than I could do from teaching a class at a university where I might get 30 students. There's 165,000 of you subscribed to this channel, and that's only about half of my views on any video. So I'm hoping a lot of people are listening to this. You don't have to agree with it all. You don't even have to do it the way I did it. But I hope it helps you in the same way that I think a mentor would have helped me 4 decades ago.
Yeah, he's 100% right. And I think Tim is doing the right thing. I think this is a fantastic way to teach people. Utilizing YouTube in short form, high-level concepts. I think Tim is unmatched in this. I yap way more than he does, and that's, to my detriment and his benefit. I just like yapping. But he's really great at what he does, and I think his POV from an RPG perspective is very helpful to me, but I can definitely understand that it's not going to be as relevant to people who make different genres of games. We glazed him. We do glaze him, but I think from my perspective, Tim is right about a lot of things. That doesn't mean that he's always right, or it doesn't mean we always agree, but he knows what he's talking about because he has way more experience than I think any of us in chat, or me especially included in that too. So when he talks about things, he talks from a point that he has done, been, and seen a lot. He deserves to be glazed. That doesn't mean that I always agree with him, but there have been many times where he teaches me new things and teaches me new ways to think about my games from a design perspective. He's also just a fantastic educator and communicator, something that I struggle with. Probably because I do have a bit of ADHD. I think faster than I speak, and then I get hung up on things, and I forget things, and then I jump on tangents, I yap for an hour, and then I get lost. And then I'm like, oh wait, what was I talking about? I don't remember. So Tim is kind of just built for this, and he's really great at it, and we like watching him. So yeah. Sivexel, thank you for the follow. And I hope you all enjoyed that video. Go give Tim a subscribe. Please go do it. He's great. And if you really enjoy him, you can join his members list and get access to videos even sooner. So thank you again, Tim, for making that. And thank you all for watching that. And I hope that we can catch you on another one of these. So bye-bye, YouTube. Bye-bye.